When the night sky fills with glamour, a lovely story awaits you. Welcome to the channel. Your presenter for the evening is me, the Midnight Venus Tanookiplayer. Have you ever experienced a game that may get strange at face value, but grew to enjoy it when you did experience it? For me, that's the subject for today's video. Catherine, an unconventional romance horror puzzle game developed by Atlus. What made me grow attached to this game, as well as its remake, Catherine 4 Body? Well, let's find out, shall we? Raise the curtains. Catherine was developed by Atlus, more specifically the team behind the Persona series, and started during the final touches of the original Persona 4. This was the team's first game for HD consoles, specifically for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Instead of immediately jumping to make a new fully-fledged JRPG Persona title, Atlus tested the waters with a smaller and grounded puzzle game. However, development still proved to be a challenge due to the team's lack of experience with HD consoles, as well as juggling between two systems, instead of focusing on a specific one, which caused some delays. It was released for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in 2011 in Japan and the US, and in 2012 in Europe. And for the time, it was Atlus's best seller, being a surprise hit for the company, especially according to the original game's director, Tatsuya Hasino, who didn't expect it at all, and was produced for a more niche audience. Hasino was also surprised to see a majority of women playing it and enjoying it. I can only imagine because the Xbox art screamed the male gaze. While this wasn't my first experience with an Atlus title, that would be Persona 3 Fez, it was the first that I beaten back around the time the original version was released. I was at university at the time of its release, and while I didn't own it, I first experienced it watching one of my former flatmates play through it one night with a few drinks, and was enthralled with the story as well as its puzzle climbing gameplay. I eventually played his copy afterwards in 1 or 2 sittings. I didn't play it for a while until I bought the Steam port around 2021 during a sale. For this video, the majority of the footage is going to be from 4 Body, which was released for the PS Vita only in Japan, as well as the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch worldwide. The latter is the version I own. So, what is Catherine about? You play as Vincent Brooks, a 32-year-old man who is employed and has been in a 5-year relationship with a 32-year-old woman named Catherine McBride. Before the story begins, Vincent is thrown into a strange nightmare where he is in his boxes, sees everyone else in the nightmare as seeps, and must climb a series of towers to overcome it. The relationship seems to have hit a road bump, as during the opening sequence, Catherine wants to advance the relationship with marriage and eventually have a kid, as most of her friends have already started a family, while Vincent seems happy the way things are. Vincent then hangs out with his friends Orlando, Johnny, and Toby at a bar discussing what Catherine wants in a relationship. We hear that one of his old friends, Paul, died in his apartment due to some mysterious curse of men who aren't fully committed to their partners or struggling with relationships into an endless nightmare that kills them if they fall in their dreams. After his pals leave, Vincent stays for a bit longer when a younger young woman named Catherine, with a C, seduces him, which may have led to a one-night stand. From here, I will be pronouncing the two Catherines differently, calling Catherine with a K as McBride, and Catherine with a C as Catherine. Each night, Vincent must overcome these nightmares in a series of puzzles while also discovering a way out, and discover what he wants in his relationship, either with McBride, Catherine, or be a free man entirely. The game is split into 2 different sections. For the main course, we have the nightmare stages, in which Vincent must climb a series of towers each night. To do this, he must push, pull, and climb a series of blocks before the floor he is standing on collapses, so you have to be on your toes and think fast enough. It sounds simple enough, and it is, but has a lot of depth. Each nightmare has a set of number of floors to conquer. Not including the tutorial one at the beginning, each nightmare has at least between 2 to 5 floors. You have your standard white blocks, heavy blocks, blocks that crumble after a single step, ice blocks that make Vincent slide, blocks that launch Vincent upwards, blocks that blow up, and many more. Throughout the levels, you can find items that can help Vincent out, like removing all enemies on screen, or allowing to create an extra block. If you make a mistake, you can undo the last action, knowing they are limited. When I first tried out the game back in 2012, I played it on easy, but in my other playthroughs I mostly start playing on normal. The first few stages were pretty comfortable for me, but it does get pretty challenging around stage 6, the clock tower. Some of these puzzles may not be noticeable to solve at first, but I felt smart beating some of these, and what makes Catherine a lot of fun is that there is no one way to beat a stage, as I mostly beat the same stage differently to what I did in my previous playthroughs. From what I've seen from others playing this game, they seem to beat these levels differently too. Each nightmare ends with a boss fight. Well, sort of, as you don't necessarily damage the bosses, more so that you need to run away from them while they have their own unique skills, like changing the properties of the blocks, or launching fireballs and chainsaws into the sky. The bosses are creatively designed, disturbing and symbolic, like the killer bride, a killer baby, and a butt monster. That one's weird. The original Catherine and the Steam port has a life system, and moving across the edges were awkward to control. As for one, you didn't see where you were on screen when you were behind the blocks, as well as inverting the controls that caused me a few accidental deaths. Full body includes a number of gameplay changes, like removing lives entirely, with the pedals now give you an extra undo instead. Lives weren't a big issue in the original version, as I felt I had plenty of pillars that appeared quite often, but the removal of lives was a nice addition, especially for the less skilled players. I wouldn't say lives are necessarily a thing of the past, as some games do at least benefit with its inclusion, but it doesn't add anything substantial with a story-driven game like this. If you use all your undos and fall off, you die and have to restart the stage. The edges are now highlighted blue if you are grabbing on the edge, making it easier to shimmy around, and you can move the camera, making it easier to know where you are when behind blocks. The new character Rin, we get to them later, gives the player extra time before the platforms fall down. I didn't really need it much, and if I did, it was because I was too busy dodging. Full body includes a new remix mode that creates new kinds of blocks that are shaped differently than the other blocks. The remix mode doesn't really make the majority of stages difficult, but just changes some of the level layout, creating new ways to progress. It's mostly there for people who played the original that want a different experience. I mostly just spent my playthroughs on the classic mode. There is a new safety mode which is for people who want to skip the puzzles and skip to destroy, which I feel detracts from the core game, as I believe the puzzles, while not the main reason to play Catherine, is still a major part of its identity that I personally enjoy, but I know there are yet few who just play games for the story. I don't recommend playing on this difficulty. You cannot skip these stages in the other difficulty settings unless you beat the game once, which, while I'm normally against having a skip button, it makes it easier to get the rest of the endings. I detest having a safety difficulty, but I can understand why the team added it to full body, as one of the treats some people have, including the major publications, was their difficulty. Apparently the Japanese version of the original game was so difficult that Atlus released a patch to add in a super easy mode that can be unlocked with a cheat code. While there were some people who weren't fans of the puzzles, it was popular enough to get a small yet dedicated competitive scene with the multiplayer mode as well as the battle mode, which is separate from the story, giving more challenging puzzles and that I'm not good enough to master. Maybe one day. The other part of the game is where you roam around the bar named the Strange Steep. interacting with Vincent's pals and the rest of the customers, order various drinks with some trivia on the side, as well as play some music in the jukebox from the game, as well as the music from the Persona franchise. In between the nightmare floors, you can interact with the patrons and give them motivation to press through, and while this doesn't affect what ending you get, it determines whether the patrons live or die. Some of the patrons also give you valuable gameplay tips. During the bar, you receive texts and calls from either girl, and depending on your responses from either girl, affects the outcome of the ending. There is an alignment system that determines the outcome of the ending, but unlike a lot of games, these endings aren't straight up good or bad, and is more aligned with the Shin Megami Tensei franchise with the concepts of freedom and order. In between the nightmare stages, you enter a confessional booth and will be asked a series of questions that aren't straight up right or wrong, but are more so like a personality quiz that also affects the alignment chart. These questions vary from whether or not you have a kinky side, or if life ends or starts with marriage. I don't mind a straight up good versus evil story, as not everything needs to be a prestige narrative that subverts expectations or pulls your heartstrings. But with a story tackling the subject of love and the inner struggles, having these types of questions really help the narrative. During the early 2010s, narrative-focused games with multiple choices that were led by the player's feelings, then the best way to get the din-din-din, were popular, like the Telltale games, so these were considered the main appeal of Catherine, and for my first playthrough, that was true. In my first playthrough, both on the PlayStation 3 and the Steam release, I immediately got the true McBride ending that came down to my own personal feelings. Like the Telltale games, if you were connected online, they would have a chart showing what other people chose in the confessional booths. Given that social aspect of the game, no, it probably wouldn't matter much today due to repeated playthroughs and its age. I've currently never been in a relationship, so I wouldn't say I would relate to Vincent or the other casts in their love problems, besides maybe Johnny and his unrequited love towards McBride. But as someone who is in their early 30s, who sometimes struggles what they want to strive for and feels stuck, it's refreshing seeing an entire adult cast going through similar struggles like trust issues and loneliness. As I've gotten older, I've grown attached to stories centered around characters my age compared to the teens that you see in the likes of JRPGs and romance anime. As someone who is trans, it's refreshing to see a fully-fledged transgender character in Erita, who, while I admit has a few hiccups, shows a somewhat realistic description of how transgender people are treated, both the good and the bad. Seeing Erita back in 2012 wasn't my first experience of knowing about transgender culture, but it was one of the earliest moments of seeing a trans person represented in a video game. While I do think Atlus has had hiccups of displaying LGBTQ characters beforehand, I think it was at least admirable of including them even around the time period where LGBTQ people, especially trans folks, weren't mentioned much in the media, at least not in a positive light. The casts are heavily flawed people, which while some may dislike, especially towards Vincent, I feel it makes them feel more approachable and relatable that may show our own flaws. Vincent is shown to have supposedly cheated on his girlfriend, which is the primary reason why some people I knew don't like him. But he has some positive aspects to him, like being a great motivator for the people he talks with through the bar and the nightmares, and him helping out the new touter Rin get a job and an apartment. He generally regrets his actions of cheating and does suffer the consequences in which the game acknowledges, and it's not just with him that suffers. People have certain aspects towards cheating, with some may see it as unredeemable, while some may forgive the person who cheated eventually. One of his major flaws is being too scared to confront his true feelings and worry about what others think of him, which is a common flaw that I can connect to in some way, which causes damage to his relationship with McBride. While the game centers around Vincent and his little circle of friends and lovers, my favourite characters are the side characters, aka the patrons at the Stray Sheep, and the sheeps between the nightmare levels, who all have their own personal demons. I want to mention the ones I enjoyed. Dustin is one of the patrons and is a reporter, and although he has never cheated, he has trouble to commit to his girlfriend as he still feels guilty of an upcoming ballerina he reported on who committed suicide. He seems like a very nice guy and even gives Vincent tips, so seeing him blame himself for something he didn't do is so sad. The police officer Morden blames himself for his wife's murder due to the final words that ended badly and vows to seek vengeance against her killer. Both Dustin and Morden cannot seem to move on due to the guilt over someone's death. Todd and Archie are two people who work together and both blame their abusive parents for how they treat women, with Todd idealizing his physically abusive father who also slept with other women, and Archie having a disgusted hatred for how his mother physically and mentally abused him as a child. Vincent is able to communicate with them, and if the player goes out of their way to chat with them, they even develop to become better people, not letting their past get the best of them. It's nice to see them grow to become better people while still dealing with the consequences, specifically Todd and Archie who get fired from their job in the Rin Route due to their history with sleeping with women. It's not just the male characters that have noticeable flaws, the female cast also have their own issues. While McBride has good intentions, just wanting Vincent to be happy, she is very controlling, like when she thinks she's pregnant, she demands that she control his bank account as she worries about how much he spends on at the bar. To be fair, it does feel like Vincent is playing with her strings with his indecisions. Catherine herself is more carefree, but she is also as manipulative as McBride, with how she threatens to kill herself, as well as Vincent, physically abuse him when he decides to break up with her, and is very emotional, leading Vincent to be more indecisive. Both girls represent the opposite of the spectrum, with McBride representing order, having a busy job, is dressed more conservatively, so minimal skin, and is more strict, thinking about the future, while Catherine is more carefree, seductive, wearing a more revealing outfit, and focuses on the present. McBride is aligned with order, and Catherine is aligned with freedom. However, both of their endings have their own pros and cons, not necessarily being the right decision. Full Body develops both girls a bit more, as we get to see the early years of Vincent's and McBride's relationship, showing how much they loved each other back then, as well as seeing more optional interactions between Catherine and Vincent's relationship. There are a total of 8 endings in the original and 13 in Full Body, with each girl getting 3 different endings in the original game and an extra one each in Full Body. The endings might feel like what girl you were drawn to like in a dating sim, but due to me voting for the other team, my original playthrough back in 2012, as well as the PC port and Full Body, I subconsciously ended up with the true McBride ending, where he commits to his relationship with her and gets married, as I probably valued of staying true to your loved one, even at the toughest of times. The game doesn't punish you for dumping McBride in favour of Catherine if you value the more eccentric lifestyle. Getting back now, I think the best endings were the true freedom ending, where Vincent voluntarily decides to choose neither girl and focus on making himself happy, as well as the exclusive Full Body ending, where McBride decides to break up with Vincent and focus on her career. Again, I never had a significant other, but seeing this ending as well as witnessing previous relationships shows that sometimes it's healthier for both people to end their romantic relationship and make themselves happier, and I'm glad the game addresses that separation is sometimes healthy. While you are playing as a male character, it was nice seeing the chosen partner's perspective on the relationship too, on how that affects them. We've seen this a bit more in Full Body with the exclusive scenes of McBride and Catherine. In a lot of romance stories, we often see the women's perspective on love, which makes sense since a lot of rom-coms are targeted towards a female audience, so it's refreshing to see men's perspective on love like the Patreons at the Stray Sheep. Full Body does introduce a new love interest in Rin. Rin is originally mistaken as a girl by the rest of the cast, excluding Erica, but we later find out that Rin is actually a guy who just happens to be very feminine. Rin is introduced by running away from a weird shadowy force and is saved by Vincent. we see Vincent give him a job at the Stray Sheep as a pianist, and throughout the game, we see them two getting on, with Rin confessing his love to him halfway through the game. Vincent then later finds out that Rin is actually a guy and immediately freaks out, causing Rin to run away. Depending on certain answers you asked in the professional briefs, we either see Rin disappear from the rest of the story, blotting out his endings, or Vincent goes back and confesses his love for him, which can lead to either a bad or a good ending. If you get a good Rin ending, we find out that he's actually an angel, which in the universe of Catherine is an alien race, and it unlocks one more stage for Vincent to triumph. The stage is pretty challenging, no, not as difficult as the prior one, and the music is a bop, being a rendition of Rise of the Valkyries. The Rin Route is pretty cute, despite the more out there ideas with aliens. Rin himself is different compared to the girls, being more confident and easygoing, making Vincent less anxious and more confident, like when he was back in his high school days. Rin is very kind, which is a tone shift, especially when he appears in the nightmares to support the Sheeps. His kindness is at fault, as every other character has some baggage, but he still presents a conflict, even if it's indirectly. His gender reveal unless he presents an issue towards Vincent at the start, and the obstacle is for Vincent to get past Rin's gender, accept him for who he is, and not let anyone else influence his decision. It was so wholesome, not only seeing positive gay representation, but also tackling the subject of gender in a mature way. While I enjoy Rin as a character and the message he brings, I would say he is already added to the story, which can be an issue when rewriting the same story. A conversation would happen about how messed up Vincent screwed up, and then immediately the writers would force Rin straight after, shifting the tone of the scene that just transpired. The game has a great story, showing us truly flawed characters that we may find unlikable in real life, and that is thanks to the game's writing, direction, gameplay, and the voice tasks done by a majority of actors who were in the Persona games. Yura Bailey brings a bubbly voice from Rise and amplifies it with Catherine. Michelle Ruff does a good job playing a strict yet lovable McBride, and Troy Baker executes the mumbling, stressed out Vincent. While I criticize how well Rin was implemented to the story, I will give credit to Brianna Knickerbocker, who nails the role of a meek, polite, and cutesy character. My favourite voice though has to be Jameson Price, who voices the narrator in the opening menu and in the bar. The way he describes the beverages is so seductive.
Say it again, Dexter.
Oh, this is sudden, but here is some trivia about sake for you.
You get trivia about the veins of drinks, from beer, sake, rum, and wine. The original game had whiskey, my personal favourite alcoholic beverage, but was sadly replaced with wine in full body. Pour one out for the king. Soji Madero of Shin Megami Tensei and Persona fame composed the music, and he does amazing work for both the bar scenes that have that chill yet daunting tone, and the nightmare levels that are straight up remixes of classical music, from Chopin's Revolutionary Etude to Rossini's William Tell Overture. My only complaint with the audio is that some of the lines get immediately cut, especially with the presenter Trissa at the beginning and at the end of the campaign. The visuals are pleasing on the eyes, and the way it introduces and ends the story with a presenter known as Trissa doing a whole quiet zone thing was something that caught my attention during my first experience of the game. It was like breaking the fourth wall. So, that was Catherine, the unconventional romance horror puzzle game. It was pretty daring 10 years ago, tackling more raunchy and mature subjects like adultery, toxic masculinity, as well as heavy flawed characters that may have left us divisive. And while it had some flaws with its direction, I will give it credit for at least attempting these subject matters. Full Body tweets out the gameplay to be a more enjoyable experience, but does have some small issues of how they introduce Rin in this story. If you enjoy puzzle games, anything by Atlus, or engaging stories with an adult cast that have deep issues, then I recommend checking out Catherine. Full Body has the most content, but if you don't have a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation 4, then the original game and the PC port are still a fine way to experience them. The PC version is possibly the cheapest way to play it. If you played this game, what was the ending you got first? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear it. Games are lovely creations, aren't they? Hope to see you soon. Stay golden.